everybody. It's Paul Borowski, Chief Distribution Officer for Sealy Investment Securities. Welcome to this episode of the Fat Pitch Podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Clint Sorensen of Wealth Shield. And Clint, you brought us a special guest this week, someone I just get to meet for the first time. So why don't you tell us about him?
Yes, I brought the man, the myth, the legend, the asset capitalist himself, Hugh Hendry. So former hedge fund manager, excellent macro strategist, and now he's in St. Bart's, just living the life. And I'm so excited to have you on the call, Hugh. So thank you for your time, and I can't wait to jump into this conversation.
I tell you, I've never met a chief distribution officer. I mean,
made up title, Hugh. I go with managing principal, and just so you know, my father's a retired admiral, and he told me the bigger the title, the less important the job. So no title on the business card.
Yeah, no, it's just like you distributing the dead bodies in cold storage or whatever.
No, I stick with the other kind of storage. But tell us your origin story. Every superhero has one.
My origin story happens very, very briefly. Born in a violent project for the first 7 years of my life. Mother on antidepressants and just way too much neighborhood violence. Father, truck driver. And through a combination of the power of one, the power of now, me, and serendipity, a lot of things fell into place. Was the first kid to go to university. Remarkably, I got a job out of university as an investment analyst in Edinburgh. Remarkably, I got a position with a hedge fund in the year 1999. I had no idea what a hedge fund was. Remarkably, with a mutual fund, I navigated the car crash of the crash in technology stocks with NASDAQ, which, the German stock market was really at that point like a NASDAQ equivalent. It fell 80%. All of my professional peer group managing mutual funds, just absolutely made such a bad job, and they all lost money. They tried to have my fund delisted because he said I was cheating, that, I was supposed to lose money, not supposed to do anything, certainly not lose money. Serendipity, that gave me a mandate to take on a hedge fund. And then I ran that for 15 years. And so, I was there really, you can't say inception. George Soros launched a hedge fund, actually with my seed investors, in 1969. But really, hedge funds really took off in the early noughties. And they took off just because conventional management had proven so lame at protecting wealth during that waterfall. And I was a macro guy. And a macro guy is not a beta guy. There's no benchmark. You've got a license to thrill. The only rule, again, is just don't damn lose money. And so that was fun until it wasn't fun. After 2008 and the regulation, the ex post regulation, the costs, it just wasn't fun. And then larger institutions wanted to pigeonhole you. And so I'm always full of passion, but it became a little bit joyless. And I closed that fund in 2017. Mm-hmm. And I had been pivoting to investing in this glorious, wonderful island, which I likened to the world of, can one say crypto? Bitcoin seems the cleaner alternative.
Yeah, safer phrase.
It's a really limited housing stock. There's no leverage. There are only 3 weird banks in France that will use the land as collateral. Each year, the little collectivity, the government imposes more and more restrictions on new build. And so it's a bit like the halving that I think we're due to see next year in Bitcoin. And then there's always, what is it from that old movie about the bank at Christmas time? When a bell chimes, they say, there's a new angel entering heaven. And there's always someone becoming rich, and they want to come to St. Bart's. So I'm here.
Well, it's all about perspective. I was thinking about yesterday, I've got a friend that reads 2 to 3 books a week. He works out twice a day. He's got no financial worries, and he's got people who want to have sex with him all the time, but he constantly complains how much he dislikes prison. I would hardly call St. Bart's prison. It sounds like quite the opposite.
You distribution officers you're on top of it.
Hey, we're just trying to get by. So Clint, why don't you talk to Hugh about, his themes right now, since this is the Fat Pitch, and, kind of how do you see the world right now? Chairman Jay Powell and the gang just raised again the day we're recording this. Don't want to say what they're going to do. Does any of this interest rate movement, has it got you thinking differently these days than maybe even 2 months ago?
No. I would like to know, you guys can verify that I am a conscious objector to the whole charade of the Federal Reserve. You had to tell me that, of course, they had raised rates today. And I'm certainly not pinned to my computer screen hanging on the words of Jay.
That's right.
And if there's a fat pitch anywhere, it's like, boys and girls, you're all being sold a charade. You get sold complexity. You get sold myth. Because the whole financial system is a casino, and they just have to keep you at the roulette wheel. And so if I have any role in this crazy world, it's kind of trying to be a truth teller. I guess I'm poacher turned gamekeeper. I can give perspectives from the inside, and try and pull people away from complexity. Try and pull people away from, the biggest casino is the options market. Every time you buy a call option or you buy a put option, you are buying something which is profoundly overvalued. Profoundly overvalued. That's why Ken Griffiths, good luck to the chap. He's going to end up being the richest person on the planet, and he's already substantial. People buy things which are profoundly overvalued. And then they buy them deeply out of the money. Why would you do that? The chances of succeeding are preposterously low. So that would be a message. Another message, and really to keep it current with today, is, having been involved in financial markets, I would be embarrassed to think it'd be multiple decades. But just no one understands money. I'm kind of known to this notion that there are less than 5 people in the world that actually comprehend money. And they don't work for the Fed. And don't get me wrong, they typically don't work for hedge funds or the Goldman Sachses and the private equity people, but they're out there. We live in a world of just chaos owing to a profound misunderstanding and a lack of willingness to have the bandwidth to really understand money. So perhaps we can discuss that. At Jay's presser at his conference today, no one will ask about money. He doesn't talk about money. In the lead up, it's all about, on financial idiot TV, it's all about, we're really looking to hear where he steers us, his emphasis, which particular words. It's just, guys, girls, what the hell is going on?
You call it that. I flat out, it's financial porn. We have food porn with cooking shows. We have financial porn, and they're glued to him as a leading man. I get it. It gets eyeballs. But you sound like Clint. Now I know why he likes following you. Clint, you talk about the options game right now and the same day stuff a lot.
Yeah, it's absurd. 0 days to expiration options, which is essentially a guaranteed loser, and people are buying them hand over fist. It's absurd. Yeah.
Now, there's a social commentary behind that, because that was the impulse that was propelling the horror of the abuse of the crypto market. And the social narrative is that there's so many folk being left behind. I call them the disenfranchised. They don't have assets. Sure. And every year, the gap between what you earn and what you need to earn to own property, etc., just widens, and it leaves you behind. And you can trace it in some respects, back to 2009. And we have to remember, no one really talks about Citigroup anymore. Citigroup was the JP Morgan of 2008. Sandy Wheel. March 2009, Citigroup was a penny stock. It was gone. Zed was dead. And the Fed and the various Treasury authorities were confronted with a stark choice that risk assets had become binary. They could intervene and and kind of preserve some form of status quo. Or they could sit idly by and stocks were going to reprice to zero, kind of Great Depression 2.0. They did something about it. They essentially used the security and the pledges of every American citizen, and they bailed out asset prices. Now, that means that if you don't own asset prices, that you were bailing out the guys and the girls that do own asset prices. Maybe one time you take the hit, but here we are 15 years or so later. They've done it multiple times. You're like, well, what's in it for kids today? You can't sell them, dollar averaging into the S&P. They need a fat pitch. They need to make, 10 times their money. They need to make it now. And unfortunately, that ferments profound over speculation, and they get picked off, sadly.
That's pretty interesting. We noticed the sea change. I'm out at a family office meetings, and it was even worse in the States in America than over in Europe, where newly minted MBAs out of Ivy League schools telling me that if the returns weren't well north of 20%, I was wasting their time. They're singing a different tune right now with a little comeuppance. That was the first thing I thought about when you spoke. The second thing was, do you compare at all the reaction? You talked about 08, 09 bailing out the asset holders with non-asset holders. Do you compare kind of all the money, the $5 trillion post-COVID that America put out that went to essentially business owners and 20% of the people, and further widen that gap? Or am I wrong on that?
Well, again, it's complicated. So specifically, you're referring to the stimmies, I think, yeah?
Well, stimulus, EIDL. I'm really talking about PPP. I got somebody at home who gets a small check. I got another guy with 12 businesses who winds up with $2 million, more than maybe his revenue that year. That seems to me to just further exacerbate similarly what you talked about.
Yeah. The good, the bad, and the ugly. There was a lot of good. Yeah, forgive me, but I'm one that kind of blurs lines. There's too much tribalism in financial conversations. There's good and there's bad. Deficits and big government is bad, and the opposite, which is more complicated. But the STEMI thing actually demonstrated that if you give poor folk money, they spend it.
Yeah. Yeah, thus the consumer remains strong.
The preposterous nature of where we are, and the precedent is that when you make rich people richer, they don't necessarily spend it. Yeah, because their propensity to consume is much less. Heavens, if I was to broaden my perspective, first of all, I would really like to address this disenfranchised nation, because it has profound negative implications for the political economy. It's tearing us apart. It's turning American upon American. It's not good, and then that applies globally. One suggestion I would have is that America should have a sovereign wealth fund that takes the place of what is a de facto plunge protection group within the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. We do know that there is a certain threshold whereby if asset prices fall, there will be a rescue. So it's inevitable there will be an intervention at some point in the future. Now, what if actually at that moment of crisis, when the central bank was actually doing something that properly conceived of as to do, like to buy proper good assets at a moment of high stress when no one else wishes to buy them? Okay, and what if it was buying it on behalf of the citizens of America, and access to that fund was means tested? So if you're a billionaire, move on. But, if you got nothing, let's talk. Let's give you an allocation. And let's use that as an asset that you can pledge in the future, either to start a business, to get a mortgage. Let's get you going. And then I would take it further again. I say, well, why do we have this profound income disparity? Why are the rich getting just profoundly and ludicrously rich? Now, people stop there and they say, well, it's the damn Federal Reserve and it's the government and all this printing money. I'm categoric in that there ain't been much in the printing money. Again, there's stories of printing money, there's fears of printing money. if there has been monetary creation, I don't really see it as having come from the Federal Reserve. I think this bogeyman, this thing called quantitative easing, is subterfuge, is propaganda. It's something that public servants it's a big reveal. Hey, American people, we stand by you. We're doing this. We're on your side. What are you doing? Okay, so maybe I have to just demonstrate that it's subterfuge, because if there's just, God forbid, it's just me, I am the private American sector, yeah? And there's the Fed, and then there's one private bank, okay? And I sell government treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, and I sell it to the Fed buys it, the Fed is expanding its balance sheet, okay? I receive digital money, I receive a digital credit to my bank, okay? My deposits at that bank will be lifted by that sum. That represents a liability for my bank. And the Federal Reserve recognizes we work on a ledger-based system. Everything has to balance. And so the balancing equivalent is a movement in Federal reserves with my bank. It's credited with a reserve. A bank then has three assets. It has reserves from the Federal Reserve. It can invest in treasuries. It can lend to the US government. Or it can make loans to the private sector. Okay, so within the three, the reserve assets have gone up and the balance sheet is unchanged. Now, there's been no printing of money, zero printing of money. Okay, what quantitative easing is latent. The presence of that additional asset, the reserve asset, which the bank has received, sitting there, and a few years back it was earning nothing. I mean, now it's kind of Kool-Aid. It's getting what, 5 and 5? Where are we? I mean, 5 and a quarter, 5 and a half. I don't know, big number, 5 something. But back when the Fed started, you were getting basis points on that asset, and so the Fed had a presumption, and I get nothing against this presumption, but the presumption was that the bank would go, yeah, why don't we draw this asset down? We have more of the other assets. Why don't we make loans to the private sector? Now, at that point, it becomes money. But following the debacle of 2008, when the American and the global banking system went kaput, and when we imposed draconian capital rules and remuneration limits in the rest of the world, banks just lost their mojo. I'm like, I think we're fine. So it categorically doesn't print money unless there is a change in the risk-seeking appetite of the banking community, and they seek to expand loans. And I'm saying too much, but so
fascinating.
The money printing is not, the source of it is not where you're led to believe. It's not the Federal Reserve. Do you want to know where it comes from?
Yeah.
So it comes from the Communist Party of China. The Communist Party of China is colluding with the cool rich cats on Wall Street. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's James Bond. I mean, the world fundamentally changed about 25 years ago. The construction of the dialogue between great nations profoundly changed in terms of the engagement of trading between the United States, Europe, China. And of course, for these purposes, we're really talking about the US and China. Yeah. And I say 25 years, I mean, maybe it's 25 or 35 years. But 35 years ago, China was the size of Turkey today. Turkey is about a $1 trillion economy. Today, China is $18 trillion. It is level pegging and soon to overtake Europe in terms of GDP. The US is more like $25, $26 trillion. Europe is stagnating. But the fundamental shift is that China, of course, is towards the end of this incredible industrialization, the industrialization that we saw in 19th century America. And when you have industrialization, the amount of domestic investment projects that offer a bonanza where you can make lots and lots of easy money, they are far greater than actually the domestic source of savings. And typically the answer, as America demonstrated in the 19th century, is you would run a trade deficit. Yeah. And trade deficits get balanced by the rest of the world sending their surplus savings to you. And so you have this gargantuan investment opportunity. You've got your savings, and the rest of the world come in and top top up the fund, and boom. South Korea did something very similar, and South Korea is arguably the greatest success story for an economy modernizing and attaining the lifestyle and the wealth that we've come to appreciate. And they did it, I think, for 48 years. They ran a trade deficit. The world has turned around, however, but China decided it watched the Asian tiger crisis. And when I say that, when you're talking about these MBAs, I've got to remind them that I'm not talking about a hedge fund crisis. I'm not talking about the tiger
cubs.
fund. Tiger cubs. I'm talking about the demise of the Thai baht. The economy of Thailand was rip-roaring, for a good 20 years. And again, it built a dependency on overseas investors funding domestic expansion. And it got out of hand, and the currency collapsed. And across the region, a lot of political leaders who'd been kind of robbing their citizens got kicked out by the IMF and other Western appointed bodies. And so China was watching this and was going, like, the number one rule of the Chinese Communist Party is persistency. Like, we're in it forever to run the thing. And so they said, listen, we're going to do industrialization and we're going to finance it domestically. And we're going to, the way we organize our affairs, effectively, we're going to encourage our citizens to have a very, very, very high savings ratio. And they've achieved that. And that means that they've run trade surpluses persistently now for 3 decades. And more than that, the trade surpluses at the peak were almost 20% of GDP. What does that mean? I mean, it needs context. When America, so if you think of after the First World War or after the Second World War, when the sovereign nations were destroyed by the horrors of conflict, and especially in the 1920s, the comparative advantage of America with all the new technologies and all, this burgeoning new economy, it was king. But the trade surplus in manufacturing was 6% at its peak, 6% of GDP. And the Chinese equivalent, modern equivalent, is more than 3 times that. So it's the size of order effect is enormous. Long story, but what that means is, so China went from $1 trillion to $18 trillion, did everything right, absolutely destroys everyone else in trade markets, and its currency has depreciated. I call their currency. Currency is referred to as the yuan, the renminbi, the CNH. I prefer to call it the red cabbage. And 35 years ago, at the time of the NAFTA agreement between Mexico, United States, and Canada, China devalued its currency to about, you needed essentially 6.3 red cabbage to buy a US dollar. And 35 years later, you need 7.3 red cabbages to buy a dollar, and you need more cabbage. The citizens become less wealthy vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And that subterfuge is maintained by China and other mercantilist nations having an insatiable appetite for the risk-free treasury securities of America. Mm-hmm. So the world today, when I say it's changed fundamentally, 80% of the world's surplus savings are invested in America. And that makes no sense. It makes no sense because all of the the investment opportunities in America are absolutely covered like 2 or 3-fold by domestic savings. And yet there's this avalanche of foreign money that comes in. That weakens their currencies. It gives them an advantage, a price advantage in trading commerce. But it makes life really difficult for the good folk, the folk who don't get any rent from any proximity to Wall Street. The people who work in Amazon warehouses, they're just being pulled down.
Yeah.
And that's the money, because clearly there has been money printed, and the money hasn't gone into the real economy, it's gone into financial assets. Financial assets have never been higher, if you will, as a percentage of GDP. But I would source that money to these overseas sovereigns. So I suggested to you that we set up a sovereign wealth fund, this emergency rescue fund that's going to be the backstop for US financial assets. and I'm going to fund it by actually imposing a withholding tax on these sovereign nations buying US treasuries. So
seems straightforward enough.
Straightforward enough, but it ain't going to happen.
That's right. I was waiting for the retort. Clint, what do you think of all that?
I mean, I love it, right? So I've followed Hugh for a while, so this is not new to me, but I'm glad he's sharing it with our audience. I would like to jump in, Hugh, in terms of, some of the fat pitch trades that you are positioning, not necessarily trades, but when you start to think about where we are globally from an economic regime shift or potential economic regime shift, right? What does that look like? Does that look like, hey, we have to, no matter what, go back to ZERP, go back to, those type of policies, defending the asset owners? Or is this something where Mr. Powell and other global central banks are saying, hey, we're going to be tighter for longer, or make sure we combat entrenched inflation? How do you kind of see this unfolding?
Yeah, great question. I've got repetitive strain injury from thinking about the world because it's just the same thing again and again.
Yeah.
The world that we have today, GDP, income, the income of America, has three determinant variables. Okay, you understand that, then you understand growth. The three components of growth, potential components, are population growth, having more babies, or being welcoming to foreigners. And we're not having as many babies, and we seem to be less welcoming to foreigners. Productivity growth, and productivity is a bit of a damn mystery. AI was invented with the iPhone. I mean, you walk around with something, you could have run Apollo 11 mission with your iPhone,
And yet, on productivity, Clint and I have a laugh every week that someone at Goldman decided 1.5 was the multiplier for AI, and Wall Street now runs with it and scales it out. It's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard.
Oh, I mean, these guys, they're like, what can we get away with this week? I mean,
I didn't mean to derail you, but it's an ongoing joke with us.
Well, so productivity has not been contributing to GDP growth. It's not being a positive factor, and that's a bit of a mystery superficially. You've got to dive deeper. So I said three. I said the kind of population growth, productivity, the two B's. The third and the fallback is debt growth, debt, a positive delta in debt, the economy taking on more debt. You do that, and you can create the wherewithal to generate GDP growth, because it's essentially it's money coming into your wallet, and there's just not enough money coming in from the other sources of population growth and productivity. And I said to you 25 years, and over that 25 years, it's clear that debt as a percentage of GDP has just gone up. And what's also clear is that since 2008, that rate of change in debt has slowed down, and the rate of change in the economy, we're not attaining the speed of growth that we previously became accustomed to. And again, that means there are some winners, but really many more losers. So that system hasn't changed. And the thing that filled me with horror was at this fragile equilibrium where we can continue to nudge ahead the economic growth of the continent of America as long as we're willing to entertain more debt. If we're not willing to entertain more debt, then you get unemployment. So ultimately, the Fed pivots, changes its mind, has regret, and cuts rates rapidly, or otherwise you get a lot of unemployment. So it's a fragile equilibrium, but you can keep it. You can keep the stasis by having the ZERP. You can basically have as much debt as you want if the interest rate is almost nothing. I was looking at a chart of Canadian house prices, I think residential house prices, versus their American equivalent. And, oh la vache! I mean,
it's a hockey stick. It is outrageous.
It's a moonshot. And I think there are storm clouds gathering over residential markets globally. But the outlier, which is Canada, arguably in about 20 or 30 years' time, unless we break this cycle, that's where US house prices will be. I think there's a lot of use. I mean, I'm no expert, and whatever I say on Canadian housing will be suspect, but you get like 30-year amortizations, In Europe, you're kind of somewhere around 15-year amortization on the mortgage debt. So there's one means that the financial economy adapts. The thing is, if you don't have debt growing, then the economy shrinks and it creates political turmoil. So the Fed should know this, but the Fed just has had the most rapid hiking cycle, and it added 500 basis points to rates. That is a perilous situation. A lot of debt, and you've just massively shocked the system with a huge cost of carry, which was unexpected.
And I saw 44% of the debt so it's like, 15 trillion or something like that in terms of that needs to be rolled over in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, there'll be lots of smart folk listening to your show. And some of them were like, oh, that guy's just one of those bears. So what's different and what's kept the whole jiggity thing together is, we had that pandemic. We had 10-year rates at like 40 basis points. We had like 30-year at 2%. And everyone refied in America. And you're fixed. You did it. You nailed it. It's amazing,
Don't forget that's a cash out refi. More money to spend.
That's right.
Let's not leave that out.
And so, no surprise. The economy hasn't collapsed. I mean, mortgage interest rate payments are, as a percentage of incomes, are half what they were in 2008. So it's like, crisis? Where's the crisis? The only point, and to your point about that rollover, a risk which has been, so the household sector is able to transfer the risk of rate shock onto capital markets. So you can transfer the risk, but you can't eliminate the risk.
It's like energy, right?
Yeah. And so the risk, again, remains in the system, but it's kind of out of view until it gets rolled. Yeah. And what is that risk? That risk is that you had a decade of financial institutions, and what they do is they lend long and they finance it at the short end. And for over a decade, both rates were really low. In real terms, zero. The problem is the short end where you fund everything now is up your ass, and that's a problem.
Are you saying mismatching's a problem?
Well, it was a problem for First Republic Bank. Yeah.
little deposit flight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I walked by a Silicon Valley Bank sign building last night in Denver. I didn't know if I'd been breathing in marijuana air on the long walk or it was a mirage, but it was there. It was still on the wall.
Yeah. And so then you get this thing, Silicon Valley Bank were jerks. They were idiots. They were irresponsible. If only it'd been a better managed bank. It's garbage. Absolute garbage. The unthinkable happened there. Again, what did we say? We said a bank has three assets. It has reserve assets with the central bank. It can invest in treasuries, and it can invest in the real economy via loans. And with the COVID, the central bank, you were talking about $5 trillion of QE, and so that $5 trillion, of course, became an inflow in terms of deposits for the banking sector at large. And Silicon Valley's deposits went from, I'm going to make this figure up, but from $40 billion to $180 billion, and in return they had these central bank reserves, and they went, we don't want to lend to the economy, let's lend to the government. And so they transferred their QE deposits into treasuries, and they put it under this thing called a hold to maturity, which is a bit of a bribe from the Fed and the treasuries, buy lots of our dope and you don't have to market to market. And there's always, to my mind, it's the conceit and the arrogance of a well-formed argument. It's a kind of cool argument. Buy these treasuries and you don't have to bring it through your income statement. That provides stability to your business. I'm in. The conceit is the Federal Reserve jacks rates up 500 basis points. And people are like, I get nothing on on deposit and I get 500 basis points with the Feds. See you later.
Yeah.
And so you then get deposit flight, and the unthinkable is that actually you have to sell those treasuries and you've got to record a loss which is greater than your net worth or your shareholder funds, and boom, boom, you're gone. So that is common to all the banks. The nature of banking, we're going to need a new model, and banking 2.0, because the existing model where with the telephone you can yank the money out immediately, the notion of having deposits funding 10-year commercial and industrial loans is looking kind of more and more precarious. Anyway, so the economy is still kind of jiggy. They raised rates. We now get a break. They can now go on holiday.
Yeah.
I doubt they're going to be reading any books about money. We have the Kardashians running the Federal Reserve. We have ace communicators, not necessarily ace monetary leaders. And
that goes for the Treasury too, right? Because that was Yellen's whole specialization was communication, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's the master of communication. And there's a funny one because Germany, whatever he's called, the Chancellor of the German Republic, at the turn of the year was just he was very emphatic that no recession with the Germans. We have no recession. We are German. And as he was speaking, the economy was in recession. Germany really is tanking just now.
And just think, the Germans avoided a cold winter. If it had been cold with no alternative to cheap energy, my God, would it look even worse?
Yeah, I'm not fat pitching you. I'm just bitching you. I'm not fat pitching.
Yeah. So what's up? Fat pitch. We got to end with the fat pitch.
We like contrarians. Yeah, Clint. We got a few minutes left here. So we know what you don't like. We know where you think there's mistakes, and we actually thrive on that. Speaking of Germans, a little Schadenfreude is fine for the masses. If somebody were to pin you in the corner and go, tell me 3 things you like that you're thinking about, not necessarily in love with tomorrow, but what are some thoughts, whether they're specific or general, that you like?
Yeah, so let's get real. I mean, for all of that bitching, the investment part is really easy. Really easy. The Fed's made it really easy, right? So let's conceive that we're a private client, we've got $1 million to play with. Yeah. What do we do with $1 million? So most hedge funds they do raise thing, Ray Dalio and Bridgewater, the all-weather type thing, kind of quadrant-like investing, making sure you're somewhat diversified, die another day. Okay, so the first quadrant is equities. We got to have an exposure to equities, right? I own NASDAQ. Is it overvalued? Sure is. It's going up. I own things going up.
Trend.
Okay. If it starts going down, I'll sell it. Okay. Now it's going up a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Now it's up 40% this year. So yeah, I've got $1 million, 150,000. 150,000 down. Okay. And I'm going to buy futures. Okay. On the Qs. Okay, what do we got next? Oh, the next quadrant, treasuries. I like treasuries. 5%. I like treasuries. But why do I like treasuries? Globally, the rest of the world is kind of in a recession. If you want to see, the Fed looks at core inflation to try and see the future. You look at core inflation, you see the past. If you want to see the future, you look at producer prices. Producer prices are now, I think, almost negative across the region of Europe and China. The last recording for June in America was 0.1 positive, so we're going negative. So I think inflation ultimately is coming down, and there's a lot of hype about the inflation thing. I want to, and I think the Fed, ultimately something will break, and the US will be part of a global depressionary recession, or deflationary recession, I should say. So I want to own treasuries. However, I buy stuff going up. They ain't going up.
No, negative trend. Yeah.
I would say using negative trend. I would say actually they've kind of gone flat for about 9 months, which is kind of not bad. Fed's been raising rates, everyone's been obsessing about inflation, the economy's been hot, and they've held their level. And so I'm talking specifically to the TLT, the tilts, the ETF, which is 17 years of duration plus. And the only reason there is, like, if the Fed eventually cuts rates, those long duration things, boy, they move. They make you a buck. So anyway, I would buy call options. And I would buy call options at the money, folks. Not out of the
not out of the money.
So like $100, and I'd buy a lot of time. You can go out to January 25, right? Because I'm a dumbass. I don't know if the recession is 2023, 2024. I just know it's not 2025.
Go for it, my
right?
friend.
I can't even
Thank
get
you very much, everybody.
So anyway, I've just spent $70,000 on option premium. Yeah. I've got 150,000 in NASDAQ. We now come into the quadrant of real assets. I would drop 50,000 in gold. I'd have to have a bit of gold, so that'd be 5% of the fund. Why? For the last 12 years, gold has been titillating with the $2,000 level. And it's been a barrier. And in my wide and long experience, when barriers get taken out, you go to the moon, baby. Now, going to the moon for gold is maybe going to 3,000. Gold can't triple. If gold tripled, it'd be worth more than all United States stock markets. Yeah, I can think of crazy stuff, but that's too crazy even for me. So I can see gold at 3,000. I'd have 5%. I'd buy more if it took out the barrier. But really, where I'd have my money, I'd have 200,000 in Bitcoin. And simply because Bitcoin is Bitcoin, not crypto. Bitcoin's about $500 billion in market worth. It's what is that? It's 1/26 the size of gold. And so, like, Bitcoin could double, triple, quadruple, and it wouldn't really be a mark on the meter on your screen. And Wall Street's getting behind it. Wall Street can smell the money from charging.
I know when BlackRock jumped in, I was thinking, oh, it's over. Here comes the fee gathering game. Yep.
The raging bull, the herd's coming. So I'd have that. And you know what? If it goes to, what is it, 29,000 and change? If it goes to 20,000, I'm buying more. If it goes to 10,000, I'm buying more. I'm buying that sucker going down, which is something I don't often do. So what have I done? Let's recap. We had $1 million. I bought 150,000 in NASDAQ futures. I spent 70,000 on call option premium for these treasury long dated. I spent 50,000 in gold futures, and I spent 200,000 in Bitcoin futures. So if I wasn't buying futures and just buying physical, I've spent about $500,000. Yeah, I've spent about half my portfolio. But actually, it's all been done in futures, and I've not really had to pony any money up. So I've still got my $1 million. And I'm sitting getting 5.5%. I've probably got some in munis getting 7%, So actually, my call option on the treasury is free, because that's just it's not free, but I'm using the carry from my cash. Yeah. I'm like, I don't need the income, but the income can buy me this insurance policy in case the economy goes down. If the economy goes down, I'm going to make money, baby. So that's what I say. Like, I'm like, this is so easy. The CLTs are 100, they trade 110. I'm buying a lot more. The Nasdaq, if it falls, I'm selling it. So I'm like, I'm chilled.
I love it.
That's not a place to be. Listen, that was Clint. Why don't you take us out here? That was too good. I'm going to end there. First time in about 12 guests, I actually made some notes. And as I'm writing them, I was thinking, wait a second, I'm going to listen to this in a few days.
Exactly.
So I told you, I'm not bright, but I always pick up the bar tab, and I'm a lot of fun.
Oh, you must come to St. Paul's.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Well, Hugh, I can't thank you enough. Tell the crowd how they can find you on Twitter, all the different socials, how they can listen to your podcast and follow you, because it is a pleasure. I just think this conversation was awesome, and I can't wait to have you back on.
I can't wait to go to St. Bart's.
I know. We should do it there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your hospitality. As my hat says, I am the Asset Capitalist. I have a Asset Capitalist podcast once a week. Cool. We have that on all the various audio platforms on YouTube. We put a free 30-minute section on the Twitter, or the X, or whatever we call it these days. I'm on the X, Hendry at Hugh. And then I take lots of St. Bart's pictures on the gram. But yeah, you guys should come. I'm doing the Asset Capitalist Summer Retreat. We're going to drop a tab of acid and see if we can make sense of Fed policy. It's going to be at my beautiful house, the Maison Blanc Bleu.
Before we go, so I've seen The Dead or Dead and Company or Jerry Garcia Band 107 times. Jay Powell was at one of the shows. So, when you say drop a tab of acid,
you might have to do that to get on his wavelength. Yeah.
Yeah. You might be tuning in because he was there at a show right up front with Bob Weir and John Mayer and the gang.
Well, I'm reappraising as you speak. Maybe Jay's not as crazy as I thought he was. But, asset capitalism is, it's a bit like Jim Morrison. What have we done to our fair sister? We've ravaged and plundered her with this chaotic and crazy blunderbuss of public policy, economic policy, which makes a tiny cohort very rich and everyone else very, very poor. I mean, literally, I've got to drop acid just to kind of deal with the absolutely awful consequences when I look at the world today. So with the power of conversation, with people listening, with trying to offer solutions, then maybe we're just one tiny step closer to finding a better resolution for the future.
You're doing God's work. To end our podcast today, since you quoted Jim Morrison, one of the quotes that I keep near and dear to me is one of his. He who controls the media controls the mind. And by getting out there talking, sending the kind of knowledge you are out there, hopefully you're putting people in a better frame of reference. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of Clint and I for joining us today. I know you're a busy man, and we appreciate having you on the Fat Pitch. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll look forward to you listening to this episode and all the ones to follow and all the ones before.